Imagine you're in the middle of the 13th century, but something is wrong. Instead of thundering towards you on horseback, their soldiers appear in roaring tanks, bristling with guns that spit fire. Back in the 1200s, a fierce nomadic tribe known as the Mongols roamed around what is today Mongolia. Led by a brilliant military strategist named Genghis Khan, they united many tribes under his banner and went on to create the largest land empire in history. Their success was mainly down to three things: speed, discipline, and fear. The Mongols were expert horse riders, and their bows were so accurate they never missed. They also instilled terror into their enemies, both with their ferocity in battle and by taking prisoners back to Mongolia as slaves. The lands under the Mongol Empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean all the way to Eastern Europe. But even though their empire was so huge, most historians agree that Genghis Khan's army probably never reached 100,000 soldiers. Discipline and fear were important parts of being successful for the Mongols, but it was their speed that really helped them conquer so much land so quickly. In the 1200s, long before cars or tanks had been invented, people usually got around by walking, riding a horse, or sailing a boat. So when the Mongol army started racing across the countryside at top speed, it was almost impossible for anyone to get out of their way. It wasn't just their ability to travel quickly that made the Mongols such a strong fighting force. It was also because their enemies struggled to keep up with them. When the Mongol army moved, they moved like a whirlwind, swooping down on villages and cities before anyone knew what was happening. This meant that most towns didn't have time to prepare for battle. They couldn't mount defenses or bring out their army. They were just completely caught off guard. So now let's introduce our what-if element. What if one day, right in the middle of their conquest, the Mongols suddenly had access to tanks? But not just any tanks. Mind you, the very first ever tanks. These armored fighting vehicles would not only be bristling with guns, but would also be sporting the very latest technology: night vision, rocket boosters, and the ability to move through almost any terrain without slowing down. The Mongol Empire was enormous, but its road network was pretty limited. In fact, most of the time the soldiers traveled by horse. So the sudden appearance of a huge convoy of tanks rumbling along roads would definitely be something that caught everyone by surprise. Not only would the cities and armies of the time be unprepared to face these new metal monsters, there would also be no word to describe them. Since they didn't exist yet, how would people even begin to understand what they were seeing? Some might think they were magical beings, maybe demons or gods come down from the sky. Others might assume they were some sort of giant robot operated by an evil sorcerer. Whatever people thought, the tanks themselves wouldn't care. They'd just keep on rolling. Tanks have been described as an army with a protective jacket, so it would be hard to defeat them even once people realized what they were dealing with. That is because the armored steel covering them would protect the soldiers inside from almost any weapon available in the 1200s. Swords, arrows, and even cannons would bounce harmlessly off the sides of the tanks. Meanwhile, the guns on board would easily blast through wooden walls and iron gates. So the first battles between the Mongol army and other nations would be pretty one-sided. Most of the time, the tanks would simply roll straight through the city gates and fortifications, with cannon fire and machine gun bullets tearing everything apart. Battles that had previously taken weeks or even months to win could be decided in just a few hours. Sieges of cities like Chengdu or Baghdad, which had previously dragged on for a long time, would be over almost instantly. The city walls wouldn't stand a chance against the tanks' powerful cannons. And after the soldiers inside realized there was no escape, they would have no choice but to surrender. Sometime during the 13th century, when Genghis Khan's grandson, Hulagu Khan, attacked the Middle East, he famously laid siege to the great city of Baghdad. At the time, it was the biggest city in the world and home to tens of thousands of people. It took his army 6 months to capture it, but with tanks on his side, Hulagu could have easily rolled into the city within a couple of hours and claimed victory for the Mongols. But while the tanks would make short work of the enemy's armies and fortifications. It wouldn't be quite so easy to control the huge, unmanageable masses of people living in the cities. And in fact, resistance would probably increase as more and more people found out about these new iron monsters. Cavalry and knights would be almost useless against the Mongol army with tanks, while mounted archers would do better. The truth is, nothing available to the rest of the world in the 1200s could compete with the power of the tanks. For example, while a cannon might be able to penetrate a tank's armor, it would take a long time to fire, reload, and aim. By that time, the tank would have already moved on. The soldiers inside the tank would also be safe from the cold, wet and wind thanks to the armored covering, meaning they'd be able to fight much longer than the soldiers who were exposed to the elements. The Mongol army wasn't just good at fighting, it was also really organized. It kept detailed records of its battles and used maps to plan its movements. It also had mobile workshops where farriers and other experts in metalworking could repair damaged armor and weapons. If the Mongols had tanks, they would put these skills to use maintaining and repairing the machines as well. Any engineers they took with them after capturing a city could help fix any mechanical problems that arose. This means that with the right training and organization, the Mongols could keep their tank army running smoothly. Once news of the tanks spread, the effect would go beyond military victories. The very sight of these new machines would be enough to make many cities surrender immediately. No one wanted to be the one to stay behind and find out what happened to those foolish enough to resist. The Mongols could use this to their advantage by pretending to be afraid and withdrawing from battle. Then they could turn around and attack the enemy when they weren't expecting it. Like when Genghis Khan pretended to flee from the Tajik clan in 1190 and ambushed them later that same day. The tanks would also help the Mongols spread fear and terror among their enemies, making them even more famous for their ruthlessness and cruelty. And since most people had no idea what the tanks were or how they worked, they'd be even more scared and confused. Propaganda would play a big role in the Mongol Empire's success. They even created a postal system to spread news of their victories. The Mongols believed that their empire was destined to last forever, and they wanted everyone to know it. If they had tanks, they would use them to spread propaganda even more effectively. The very sight of the tanks would be enough to intimidate their enemies. And when the soldiers inside started handing out leaflets describing the power of their godlike war machines, there would be no doubt in anyone's mind who was winning the war. As the Mongol Empire grew, other countries would start working together to try and stop the tanks. The Europeans, Chinese, and Middle Eastern nations would form alliances and share ideas about how to defeat the new metal monsters. Some would try to copy the tanks by taking apart the ones they captured, but it would be difficult to reverse engineer the technology. Others might focus on developing weapons specifically designed to destroy tanks, like rockets filled with explosives that could pierce the armor or long-range artillery pieces, capable of hitting moving targets. Still, others might try to sabotage the tanks by hiding near the roads and throwing rocks or other obstacles in the path of the machines. But even with all these efforts, it would be hard to stop the Mongol war machines. The rest of the world would start to feel the effects of the Mongol tank army through their daily lives. No longer would only soldiers be forced to ride in the armored vehicles. Merchants and important figures would also use them to travel safely across the empire. After all, the safety of the roads had gotten pretty bad with all the fighting going on. With tanks, merchants could keep trading and moving goods across the empire, helping it grow even bigger and wealthier. If the Mongols had tanks in the 1200s, it's likely that art, legends, and stories about them would have sprung up everywhere, describing the day when the Iron Army came and swept across the land. There would be songs about brave knights who tried to stop the tanks with their swords, and tales of how the metal monsters breathed fire and destroyed everything in their path. Kids would tell each other scary stories about the tanks, making sure to leave out the part where they were supposed to surrender immediately when they saw them coming. The Mongols' introduction of tanks into the 1200s would have a massive effect on the world. The empire would probably expand even further than it did in real life. possibly reaching the Atlantic Ocean, Africa, or even the Americas. The vast amounts of knowledge needed to build and maintain tanks would also help speed up the development of ironworking mechanics and warfare technology, perhaps leading to the discovery of gunpowder or even steam power centuries before it happened in our timeline. Suddenly having access to advanced technology like tanks would change everything. Of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. Having a massive empire that was also on wheels would make it much harder to control. The Mongols would probably collapse from within long before they reached the Atlantic or the Americas. Rebellions and chaos would grow as people struggled to deal with the new tech and the desire for power it brought. Would the Mongols have conquered the whole world if they had tanks? Or would chaos have ended it all much faster? Let us know what you think in the comments. And thank you for watching. If you like this video, remember to hit the thumbs up button to help us grow.